I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Any other members wish to speak on the amendment? Mr. Johnson's recognized for 3 minutes.
I would just note, I mean, the gentleman from Massachusetts suggested that we would have less science basis in these decisions, and I would just remind the chamber that nothing in this amendment would change the underlying demands of FIFRA, that the decisions of EPA are based on foundational science-based decisions. This doesn't change that. That will always be the law of the land.
Gentleman yields back. Any other members seek recognition to speak on the amendment? If not, let me share some thoughts on this amendment. I thank the gentleman from North Carolina for offering this amendment. Any pesticide registered by the EPA has undergone through human health and environmental risk assessments, and the EPA-approved label dictating the use of these tools already incorporates measures to mitigate any potential risk to human health or the environment. As such, requiring any duplicative permitting process to use pesticides is simply bureaucratic red tape and wastes taxpayer dollars, and quite frankly, drives up the cost of food. American agriculture has been subject to burdensome regulations like these for way too long, and it's time for Congress to step in and provide relief for our farmers and ranchers. I support this common sense amendment and urge my colleagues to do the same. Does any other member wish to be recognized? Hearing no further conversation, the question is on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed by saying no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Are there any other amendments to be offered under Title 10? We're getting to the home stretch. Any other under Title 10? If hearing none, Title 10 is now closed. Are there amendments to Title 11?
Mr. Chairman, I've got an amendment at the desk.
Who seeks recognition? Oh, Ms. Sorensen. Ms. Sorensen has amendment at desk number 55. The clerk will distribute the amendment and report the title of the amendment.
Amendment number 55, offered by Mr. Sorensen.
As the amendment is distributed to members, Ms. Sorensen, you are recognized for 3 minutes to explain your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In every conversation that I have with farmers in my district, I hear one thing over and over and over again, the need for stronger and more expanded crop insurance. Strengthening crop insurance isn't just about providing a safety net for family farmers. It's about keeping our agricultural economy strong and our grocery stores stocked. In Congress, I'm working and I'm focused on lowering the cost of food for my neighbors. It means recognizing the critical importance that crop insurance plays in keeping the prices down at the grocery store. For far too long, commodities that have been fortunate enough to have productive seasons have been overpaying for crop insurance. So farmers in my state of Illinois, corn farmers, and especially soybean farmers, they've been paying so much more for crop insurance to subsidize the rest of the commodities like cotton, peanuts, and rice. Farmers in the Midwest should not be paying to grow southern crops. That's not fair for the farmers that I represent. In fact, in the land of Lincoln, that adds up to $142 million taken from our farm families every year. The Risk Management Agency knows there's a problem, but has taken no steps to remedy it. So during a time when farmers are being squeezed by decreasing crop prices and increasing input costs, the overpayment really matters. My amendment directs the Federal Crop Insurance Corporation to study loss ratios and then make the necessary adjustments to premiums so Midwestern farmers are no longer overpaying. I hope my colleagues believe in leveling the playing field for all American farmers. While I offer this amendment in good faith and believe in making sure farmers are equally opting into the safety net, I believe that this should be a separate amendment outside of this year's Farm Bill. And for that reason, Mr. Chairman, I'll be withdrawing it, and I yield back.
The gentleman is withdrawing his amendment. Any other members seek to speak on the amendment? Congresswoman Bazinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to voice my support for this amendment. Apart from recognizing the overarching significance of crop insurance as an indispensable tool for our growers in Illinois, there's a growing sentiment among our farmers that their low loss ratios are not being appropriately valued. Since 2020, Illinois soybean farmers registered a loss ratio of 0.2, while corn farmers recorded a 0.19. Nationally, these figures stand significantly higher, with soybean farmers at 0.56 and corn farmers at 0.65 over the same period. Illinois farmers feel that they are disproportionately contributing to the crop insurance program, particularly when compared to regions experiencing high loss ratios. Over the same time frame, some states have reported soybean loss ratios as high as 1.80 and corn loss ratios at 1.17 and beyond. The Risk Management Agency has previously undertaken third-party independent studies on premium rates and the rating process of commodities. These studies have revealed disparities in loss ratios across commodities and states, prompting adjustments in premium support. In order to ensure that loss ratios are not being skewed in any one direction or another based on regional differences, this study is extremely important to ensure equity for our safety net programs. Thank you very much, Chairman, and I yield back.
Gentlelady here yields back. Mr. Mann's recognized for 3 minutes.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the gentleman for introducing this and for withdrawing it. You know, we've got to continue to look at and reform crop insurance. And when I think about the Farm Bill and the safety net today, and all the listening sessions we did in Kansas and Texas and all over the country, repeatedly, I think what anyone that was listening to this, for our producer said, is crop insurance is incredibly important. And, you know, I would argue that crop insurance is the most successful public-private partnership in the history of America. And it's also the most cost-effective way to deliver a robust, constant food supply. It's the best thing that man has ever devised to stabilize agriculture markets. We got to, though, make sure that we're continuing to improve it. We got to make sure that we're looking at all aspects of it. We got to make sure that it works for all commodities. And I appreciate you. And I think this committee, it's incumbent on us to look at any and all ideas on how to strengthen, buttress, understand, and keep improving this tremendous product, which is crop insurance. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. With that, I yield back.
Very good. Anyone else? Mr. Costa. Recognized
Yes.
for 3 minutes.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank the chair and the efforts of the committee at most of the field hearings. The issue of crop insurance continued to come up and up on a regional basis. The fact that you were able to include looking at new policies as it relates to insurance due to trade losses, I think is an important addition. Plus, in addition to that, the robust efforts to provide inflationary adjustments also is very important. Specialty crops throughout the country and certainly in California really appreciate the improvements that have been made, and I hope that we'll be open as we look to a conference committee later on to maintaining what's in here and maybe looking at some additional improvements that can be made. And I also will say, because I missed out previously, but those specialty crops also improve the previous, appreciate the previous amendment on the pesticide conformity registration, which is also very important as well. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Johnson is recognized for 3 minutes. No? Okay. Mr. That's true, but just kidding, Dusty. Mr. Van Orden is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make sure that everybody understands how incredibly important crop insurance is. The average farmer is going to borrow more money in a single growing season than most Americans will borrow in their entire life. And we're all in support of small and medium-sized farms, in addition to our larger farms. We need all three, We need the strategic, operational, and tactical level farms. So when we bemoan rightly the closing of these small and medium farms, one of the things that we can do to help prevent that is to make sure that our small and medium farmers have access to affordable crop insurance. So I'm very proud that this farm bill is addressing that directly head on, making sure that our smaller family farms have the ability, in the case of something that happens that is out of their control, like the vicious tornadoes that just took place in Mr. Nunn's district, that they have the ability to get that farm going again. And the one way to do it, to keep things viable, is having affordable crop insurance. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Do any other members seek to speak on this withdrawn amendment? Are there any other amendments or things that people want to talk about? What's that? He hasn't officially withdrawn his amendment, Mr. Sorensen. No, he did. He already did in this. Well, I'll just check to correct. Mr. Sorensen, you said you withdrew, yeah. Very good. Well, is there any further debate or amendments to Title 11? Hearing none, Title 11 is now closed. Are there any amendments to Title 12? I know Mr. Bacon has an amendment, the number.
Jim.
Mr. Chair, in lieu of an amendment, I'd like to engage a council.
Okay.
I know you do. You couldn't give it to us on time.
Get my mic turned on. Has worked to reduce the effects of drought on people, the environment, and the economy. The U.S. Drought Monitor Map is a primary product produced by this team of researchers. Released each week, the map shows the location and intensity of drought across the nation and is the country's most widely used gauge of drought conditions. In fact, USDA relies on it as the official mechanism to trigger a variety of risk management and disaster relief programs, including disaster declarations, release of conservation reserve program acres for haying and grazing, and to determine eligibility for the livestock forage disaster program. Despite USDA's heavy reliance on this product, the National Drought Mitigation Center is dependent on an ad hoc funding approach, relying mainly on uncertain annual appropriations. The federal government must commit authorized dedicated funding to ensure this team can continue to provide critical tools for effective administration of federal drought assistance programs and to better support USDA in anticipating and reducing the effects of extreme weather on U.S. agriculture producers. Chairman Thompson, moving forward, I'd like to work with you to ensure the University of Nebraska-Lincoln can continue to enhance and improve the accuracy of the United States Drought Monitor that is used for implementation of USDA nationwide for disaster assistance and drought-related programs. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman, and certainly look forward, and we know that, there's no industry that's more impacted by weather, and certainly it seems like the further west we go, drought is a tremendously impacting issue. It hurts the economy, hurts access to nutrition, just all across the board. So you have my commitment, to continue to work with you. Having had the privilege of visiting the university during one of those listening sessions, I look forward to continuing our work together.
The university is very proud of this program, and it provides a service nationwide.
Yeah. Mr. Sorensen, do you want to speak on this?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to commend my friend from Nebraska for bringing this up. As a meteorologist for 20 years, I don't think I've ever been able to give the University of Nebraska-Lincoln a thank you for putting out the drought monitor that we have relied on every Thursday. So they worked all week to produce the drought monitor for today that helps us make good decisions, and I'd like to work with you on this issue. I know it's getting late, but come on.
Mr.
Chairman.
Any other
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment.
speak on that amendment? I think that Mr. Van Orden has an amendment.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to, I have an amendment at the desk. It is amendment number 7.
Amendment number 7 is at the desk. The clerk will circulate the amendment and report the title.
Amendment number 7, offered by Mr. Van Orden.
Thank you, sir. If it's all right, I'll just get started while they're circulating it.
The gentleman is recognized for 3 minutes to describe his amendment.
I have a letter I would like to introduce to the record. It is signed by over 200 dairy business leaders from 31 states, and it's in support of my amendment, the Dairy Business Innovation Act. It was first enacted in 2018, and I have submitted an amendment to increase the funding from $20 million to $36 million. This program has proven to pay for itself over and over and over again. With our international marketplace volatility, severe labor shortage, rising operation costs, and supply chain disruptions, the challenges that our dairy industry is facing are unprecedented. The long-term stability of the $753 billion U.S. dairy industry must be assured. I want to point out some numbers from my home state of Wisconsin, which again is, I remind you, is America's dairy land. In January 2023, the Wisconsin Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection reported that there was 5,661 licensed dairy herds left in the state, and that's 455 less than there was the previous year. For our Wisconsin farms and the dairy industry to survive and thrive, innovation is a requirement. Regardless of the size of the operation, farm and plant modernization, new product development, and revenue stream diversification and outreach into emerging global markets is essential. The barrier to these essential innovations is capital, an issue directly addressed by the Dairy Business Initiative. Now, I understand that there has been a snafu, or there was a snafu in the appropriations process when the monies were originally allocated, or appropriated rather, for the Dairy Business Initiative. And I also understand that this makes this amendment untenable at this point. And if it's not withdrawn, the potential for DBI to not come to fruition at a higher funding level is a real possibility. And I am unwilling to risk this vital program, and with the chair's assurance to work with our team during the conference process to get these funding levels increased, because the Senate does have a different set of rules. With the chairman's assurance that he will work with our team to try to get this over the finish line to help secure our dairies, I would be willing to withdraw this amendment.
Well, I thank the gentleman from Wisconsin for his strong support in being a champion for the dairy industry, including the Dairy Business Innovation Initiatives that were created in the 2018 Farm Bill. As representative of Pennsylvania's 15th Congressional District, I too am a strong supporter of the dairy industry, and I appreciate the role that the Dairy Business Innovation Initiatives have played in boosting the dairy industry since their inception. Unfortunately, as you noted, increased authorizations are exceedingly difficult due to House protocols related to discretionary authorizations. However, you have my commitment to work with you and my Senate counterparts in conference on improving this program, the Dairy Business Innovative Initiatives.
With the chairman's assurance, who I respect tremendously, I will respectfully withdraw this amendment so that we can help get this over the finish line during the conference process.
I recognize Mr. Langworthy for 3 minutes to speak on this amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just to reiterate the importance of the dairy industry to my district in New York's 23rd district, what these programs would certainly help our struggling farmers at this point to increase their business in the bottom line, and would mean a great deal. So I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Anyone else, any other members seek recognition to speak on this amendment? If not, Mr. Rouser seeks recognition. For what purpose?
Yes, sir. I have an amendment at the desk.
Mr. Rouser has an amendment at the desk. What?
Number 17.
Number 17. The clerk will distribute the amendment, and the clerk will report the title.
Amendment number 17, offered by Mr. Rouser.
That's the clerk gets started here with distributing this amendment.
And Mr. Chairman, I'm going to explain the amendment and then withdraw, if that helps to expedite things here a little bit.
Okay, the gentleman clerk is circulating. The title's been reported. The gentleman Gentleman is recognized for 3 minutes to explain his amendment.
Well, Mr. Chairman, if you like country ham, this amendment is for you. This amendment sheds some light on an issue encountered by regional country ham producers due to the ambiguous guidance FSIS has issued regarding the use of wooden racks in the country ham curing process. For more than 150 years, country ham has been a popular product produced in North Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, and Kentucky. The use of wooden racks is essential to the tradition and curing process of these hams. Undue precaution of the practice and the service's preference for stainless steel has caused some inspectors, who are either new or unfamiliar, to interpret the current statute differently during routine safety inspections at facilities that use these wooden racks. It's my understanding this is due in part to the service's lack of clarity regarding the statute defining material and construction to facilitate thorough cleaning as the way it's written in the current regulations. All official establishments maintain sanitation standard operating procedures as required under law, including sanitation, inspection, and repair of racks as frequently as necessary to prevent the creation of insanitary conditions or the adulteration of the product. Yet they continue to encounter inspectors that raise concerns with this tried and true process. FSIS should work with those who have the expertise in the country ham curing industry to better examine the safety of wooden racks and update the inspection guidance to better explain the safety and standards used. So, Mr. Chairman, I don't believe I'm the only member of the committee with concerns regarding implementation of the FSIS statute, and I understand the difficulty with this amendment at this time, but would love to work with you as we work on the remainder of the Farm Bill process here to get additional oversight over FSIS on this issue, and perhaps maybe some report language at the end of the day. So with that, I withdraw the agreement, or I withdraw the amendment, and look forward to your comments.
Any other members wish to speak on Mr. Rogers' amendment number 17?
Bacon likes ham, that's all I have to say.
Oh, Dr. Baird? Dr. Baird is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, we've had a lot of discussion here about agriculture and so on. You know, as a 3-time graduate of Land Grant University and former extension agent, I just want to express my strong support for the idea about research in our ag bill. It's so important. Many of us have mentioned it, and so I'm particularly proud of the investments this bill makes in research, extension, and education activities, and the amount of the single largest investment in research in modern Farm Bill history. And as you know, every $4 that we put into research it yields $20 in terms of return. And we also need to be keeping ahead of our adversaries like China. And so research to me is a major investment and way to stay ahead of that. And right along with that, this Farm Bill commits $2.5 billion to research facilities, and that can be transformational in our land grant and non-land grant College of Agriculture, and to help clear the backlog of deferred maintenance on agricultural research facilities that have ballooned to about $11.5 billion in recent years. So I think we have, in some ways, neglected some of our research facilities. And if you want to hire the top end of the professionals to work and do the research, then it's really important to have upgraded and relatively new facilities. So having the state-of-the-art facilities will not only help improve the quality of research conducted in these universities, but they will also help attract the best and the brightest researchers and students who will train to become the next generation of researchers. Additionally, this bill provides significant increases in funding for the Specialty Crop Research Initiative that will help the specialty crop industry develop new innovations that will further that industry. And lastly, This bill reauthorizes and improves numerous capacity funding and competitive grant programs that the United States Department of Agriculture will implement to support these research, extension, and education activities. As the chairman of the Subcommittee on Conservation, Research, and Biotechnology, I'm proud of the work we've done in this research title and look forward to moving this farm bill forward. And with that, I yield back.
Back. The other members seek recognition. Mr. Rose on another amendment? Okay, yeah, let me just finish up on this one. Any other members wish to speak on this amendment?
On research?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would, Mr. Yeah.
Mr. Mann is recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I have Kansas State University in my district, you know, a research institution, Haskell as well, another land grant institution. I know you have Penn State in your district, and you know, when you look at the return on investment for the dollars we're spending on research, it's 20 to 1. And so this is something we absolutely need to be supporting in this farm bill. And now we're in Title 12, Mr. Chairman, and this long day starting to wrap up. I just, it was a moment of personal privilege. No one has any objections, but you know, this last couple of years, ton of work, and I just want to acknowledge you, Mr. Chairman, all that you've done during this process. You were in 40 different states, 7 regional listening sessions, went through all of this with cancer this year. Remarkable what you've done and what you've pulled off. And I think whether people can vote for the bill or against the bill, I do believe that everyone here should acknowledge all the work that our chairman has done in pulling this together.
That's enough. Let's get this done. No, thank you really, very much. I can't think of a better group to work with. I appreciate all of our members on this committee. Let me just say to Mr. Rouser, you know, I want to thank the gentleman for bringing this to the attention of the committee. It is important that FSIS is able to continue carrying out their food safety mandate while being transparent to processors and inspectors alike about what types of materials are allowed to be used. I'm sympathetic to the confusion of the country ham industry, a little partial to country ham, actually, in a very tasting way, when dealing with the back and forth of what is allowed. However, I do believe this issue is best solved through direct engagement with FSIS to ensure processors and inspectors have clarity under the current regulations. Again, I thank the gentleman for bringing this to our attention, and I look forward to working with him and the industry to solve this issue. And Mr. Rose, you seek recognition?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Amendment number?
58.
58. The clerk will distribute amendment number 58 for Congressman John Rose and will report the title of the amendment.
Amendment number 58, offered by Mr. Rose.
All right. So we're good to go, right? Yeah, and this, and we'll do this one. They're still working. That's all right, no, thank you.
Yeah, we do.
Excuse me, boss.
Oh, what they do?
The clerk having distributed the amendment and provided the definition of title, the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Rose, is recognized for 3 minutes to explain his his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment protects the authority of the Farm Service Agency, or FSA, to implement the Conservation Reserve Program. Instead of giving the Secretary of Agriculture the option of allowing the Natural Resource Conservation Service, or NRCS, the opportunity to play a larger role in retiring production acres. The Department of Agriculture Reorganization Act of 1994 upheld the authority of FSA to administer the Conservation Reserve Program established by the Food Security Act of 1985, a program which retires agricultural acres from production. Since its establishment, the implementation authority has remained with the FSA with technical input from the NRCS. My amendment ensures that the production farming community within FSA has the authority to determine which lands should remain in service or be retired. Providing the NRCS with additional authority over the programs opens the door for conservation concerns to overshadow production agriculture, which I believe is counterproductive to the purpose of this bill. Production agriculture has been impacted by rental rate increases over the last 20 years. As rental rates rise, land shifts from crop or livestock production to short or long-term set-asides. The farmer-elected FSA County Committee, the state executive director for FSA, the administrator of FSA, and others would be removed from the decision-making process when it comes to the CRP program. In other words, this provision will shift the program from local control and political appointees to career USDA employees. Today, farmers have the ability to provide important input and monitor the program. America's farmers are the best and earliest stewards of the land, and they hold the key to our food supply chain. Farmers know the land, and given their integral role at the FSA, that's where the authority to implement the Conservation Reserve Program should rest. I applaud the tremendous amount of work our chairman and his staff have put into developing this farm bill, but I believe farmers and producers will be better served by this bill if FSA maintains its current and existing authority with regard to the Conservation Reserve Program. I ask my colleagues to support this amendment as it protects farming in America and closes the door on another slippery slope policy. Mr. Chairman, again, I want to thank you for all of your hard work and that my colleagues on this farm bill have put into it. And with that, I want to say, Mr. Chairman, I intend to withdraw this amendment, but hope that you will commit to work with me and others to get to a better place with respect to this issue.
The gentleman withdraws, but we'll see if any other members wish to speak on this amendment. Mr. Molinaro? Or Mr. Alford? You wish to speak on this amendment? Does any other members, any members wish to speak on Mr. Rose's amendment? Mr. Alford?
If I could engage with conversation with Mr. Rose, because I think this is an important question. I know he's withdrawing this amendment, but how, Mr. Rose, how is this going to protect our farmers by maintaining this local control through FSA?
Sure. So it is my belief, both as a former participant in farm programs and in my representative work here in Congress, that when Congress placed administration of the CRP with the Farm Service Agency, they smartly, previous Congress, smartly understood that production agriculture farmers at the local level have an inherent opportunity to provide leadership to those local county committees and the county executive directors. And frankly, they're in the best position to help guide policy and make sure that there is grassroots input from production agriculture into how the CRP program is administered. I think it would be a mistake to move that control to the NRCS, which lacks that local county input. And so that's my basic premise here.
So could it be at stake that this other entity could decide what acreage is taken out of production and moved into conservation, and thereby taking away that option from the local producer?
I think that's right. Again, I think we want American agriculture. We want farmers to produce, and so we want the driving force in the CRP program to be have embedded in it a deep understanding of local production circumstances. And the only way we can ensure that, in my view, is by having FSA and its elected county committees continue to have a vital role in the administration of the CRP program.
Well, thank you, Mr. Rose. I appreciate your input on this. And, Mr. Chair, I look forward, I would gladly work with you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Rose on this. This is very much interest to me and my district, and I look forward to working with you on this. And thank you. I yield back, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I've been trying to get recognized since the start of this title, so just wanted to see if, I don't know if you could see me through Mr. Sorensen.
You have an amendment at the
Yes,
desk,
sir.
correct? Well, let me just see if there's any more comments on this amendment, and we're going to miss you, Ms. Kasar. Any other member wish to speak on Mr. Rose's amendment?
Meteorological cloud.
Seeing none, we'll move on. And I think that Mr. Kasar has amendment number 59.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will circulate the amendment and report the title of the amendment.
Would you like me to wait until it's passed out, Mr. Chairman? No. Mr. Molinaro is the chairman. Can I go ahead?
Yes, sir. Mr. Kasar, you're recognized for 3 minutes to describe your amendment.
Thank you. The United States Congress outlawed child labor in meatpacking plants in 1938. But in 2024, oppressive child labor remains a pervasive problem. Week after week, thousands of kids are illegally sent to hard labor jobs like cleaning kill floors on graveyard shifts. My amendment before you does something about this in the Farm Bill. At a baseline, we should enforce child labor law like the minimum wage with mega corporations who directly contract with the United States government and the U.S. Department of Agriculture. The USDA contracts for worth more than $560 million per year with the nation's largest meatpacking corporations. The big four meatpackers, Purdue, Tyson's, JBS, and Cargill, all have plants where the Department of Labor has found violations of child labor law. These corporations are worth billions of dollars. They have legal departments bigger than most law firms. These big guys know how to follow child labor law, and they can certainly afford it. All my amendment asks for is consistent enforcement of our existing child labor laws and minimum wage rules. These rules from the 1930s, for them to be consistently applied through our federal meatpacking contracts. None of us here want to hear more testimony about kids with chemical burns and lacerations from cleaning bone-cutting saws. None of us believe that kids should be scrubbing meat grinding machines instead of going to school. I know that I have distinguished colleagues on both sides of the aisle here who have spoken up against illegal child labor, and this is a chance to put those words into action. Right now, we can say we're disgusted or disturbed by these practices, and now we can do something about it instead of turning a blind eye to the child labor that's going on while we hand out multi-million-dollar contracts. I believe this is a way that we can enforce this, and it's narrowly tailored to address the contracts that the USDA has, and so it falls squarely here within our work here in the Agriculture Committee. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Any further discussion on the gentleman's amendment?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Van Orden?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I truly appreciate the spirit of this amendment. I do have a secondary or a second-degree amendment that I'd like to add to this. Here's the issue. There was a company in the state of Wisconsin that was found to have hired 100 children. They were fined $1.5 million, and the company took a very serious hit, and I understand it, as they should. We don't want kids working in these conditions. We don't. Here's one of the issues, though, that I think your amendment, sir, does not address properly. Every single one of those kids that was hired passed E-Verify, all of them. And so what we could be doing here inadvertently, the secondary unintended consequence of this very well-intended amendment could be that we would be having companies that are following all of the legal procedures to the best of their ability that are then held accountable for something that they truly did not do. And here's where I want to work directly with you. I want to have the GAO give us a report that's going to identify identity fraud, document fraud, any of these other fraudulent practices that are taking place. And I want to get this nailed tight so we do this right the first time. Because what you're saying is absolutely, it's correct. But I don't think the method, we are trying to get to the same place, sir, and I just think that how you're trying to get there is going to have more negative consequences than it is positive. And so I would like to submit this second-degree amendment so that we can try to clamp down and stop child labor in the United States of America.
Would the
in
gentleman
most
yield?
horrendous conditions. I will not.
You got a lot of extra time.
With that, I yield back my time, Mr. Chair.
Dr. Adams. We're on the secondary first procedure.
Oh, okay.
So-
Well, I don't support that one. Yeah, where is it?
It doesn't actually have an amendment.
No, I'm sorry. Will the clerk would distribute the secondary amendment
Yeah, I think that would be good.
and report the title? Mr. Chairman?
Is there a secondary?
Mr. Chairman, could you explain the procedure we're following?
There was a second-degree amendment.
But we were acting on the First Amendment.
Until there was a second-degree amendment was offered.
Well,
It's right here. It's mine.
but are we acting on we're going to dispose of the second degree
We have to-
amendment first and then
We have to deal with
act on the first
secondary-
one?
We have to deal with the secondary amendment first, see
Okay.
if it passes or not. So we'll let that secondary amendment get distributed. Do they have to report? No.
I don't know.
But if you want to give me some indication, I got you, Em. Some indication you'd like to speak on the secondary amendment, I'll build my list here. So far, I have Ms. Spanberger, Mr. Alford, Mr. Vasquez.
Mr. Van Orden, we engage Mr. Bishop.
Sorry, sir?
Mike's not.
Your mic's on.
Clerk has distributed the secondary, Mr. Van Orden's secondary amendment, and I recognize Mr. Alford. Recognize Mr. Alford.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Chairman. Ms. Van Orden.
I ask unanimous consent that the word state in the first paragraph get changed to date. That is a typographical error.
It's fine, that will be taken care of.
I will take care of that in terms of technical corrections. Mr. Alford, you're recognized for 3 minutes on the secondary amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in favor of this amendment to the amendment, this secondary amendment, or perfecting amendment, as some might call it. I think this is an important issue that we look at, but it definitely needs a look. The secondary amendment requires a GAO report on the use of child labor among entities that contract with the USDA, and I am in favor of Mr. Van Orden's request for that, and I hope we can vote on this. Thank you, sir. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Ms. Spanberger, recognized for 3 minutes.
So I might get the procedure on this wrong, but I've got a couple questions related to the comments that Mr. Van Orden made, where he was talking about a Wisconsin business that was had children working at their facility, and then they got in trouble, and then they had to pay fines. How is it that it was found out that they had children working in their facility?
Will a gentle lady yield?
Yes.
It was widely reported. It was actually reported by NPR, which I think is the only accurate report I've gotten from NPR in a long period of time.
Okay, so reclaiming my time, and I will have some follow-ups if the gentleman would like to have time yielded to him. So if NPR could figure out that there were kids working in a facility, I'm curious as to why the hiring agency couldn't.
Well, the hiring agency followed all of the appropriate laws that are in place, including to use E-Verify, which is one of the reasons that we have an issue with E-Verify itself. So my concern, ma'am, is that if we have companies that are following all of the procedures that are put in...
Well, if they were fined over $1 million, then one would assume that they didn't follow the law. And if NPR, not working in the facility, not examining those documents, were able to determine that they had hired children to the point where then they were fined for it, it just seems curious that the hiring entity, this big, large company, wouldn't have been able to determine that themselves as well.
Well, that, in fact, may be curious, but it's also the truth. So...
a company working in good faith that doesn't want to hire children and just goes through the paperwork and might have issues, it does seem that we would want to affirm what is the law in our country, and so I'll be, I think that we should just go ahead. We don't really need a study to know that children shouldn't work in meatpacking industry. And we don't necessarily need a study if NPR and reporters can clearly determine that kids are being used in these facilities. I question what a GAO report would actually do, understanding that children are working in these facilities. I don't think we need to understand that. I think we just need to enforce the law. And with that, I yield back.
Mr. Chairman?
Gentlelady yields back. Recognize Mr. Austin Scott for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to point out that if we're talking about, these are FSIS inspected facilities, when you talk about meat and poultry packing, I know it's easy to call Cargill and the other big guys by name. I don't like the consolidation of the packing industry, but the fact of the matter is there are 292 in the state of Georgia. The majority of these are going to be small grocery stores that do some type of custom cut meat or some type of sausage or something else that they sell. The state of Virginia, there are 131. The state of Florida, there are 390. I mean, it's easy to call out the 1, 2, 3, and 4, but the fact of the matter is there are thousands of small businesses throughout the United States, and before you go down this path, the right way to do it is to have a study to take a look at who it's going to impact. I'm just telling you, it's not just the big guys. 292 in Georgia, 390 in Florida. No, ma'am.
Then I'd like to be recognized.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I love the idea of a study about these benevolent employers that are unknowingly employing minors in the agriculture industry. Why don't we take it one step further? Why don't we talk about undocumented workers in the agriculture industry? Why don't we actually figure out how folks are actually not using the E-Verify system and still employing undocumented workers and employing minors? That is, I believe, the heart of what Mr. Kassar's amendment gets to. So if we're going to look at truly how this happens, it's not through the legal systems. That's the point of how these employers skirt around the official rules. And so let's also look at the construction industries. Let's look at developers. Let's look at folks who are employing undocumented workers and minors all across the country. I would welcome such a study so that we can get to the root of the problem. Because when we talk about these folks, whether they're minors or undocumented workers, we have to look at the employers. And so a study like this would be great, but it can't just go to the E-Verify system and how folks are cheating that system. It has to go deeper into the roots of how folks are paying people under the table all across this country and taking advantage of labor in this country for folks that have no rights, which includes minors. Then we can get to the root cause of how badly we need these workers in the ag industry and how badly we need them in construction, infrastructure, healthcare, and every other industry. With that, I yield back my time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize Mr. Johnson for 3 minutes.
I want to, Mr. Chairman, address some process concerns. This is clearly something a lot of us care about. I mean, child labor is evil, and I do think we want to figure out how to root it out and how to punish those accountable for these acts of evil. This is a complex amendment with both the secondary and even more so the underlying amendment that I don't fully understand the impacts of. So for instance, if USDA can't go and any longer contract with somebody who is responsible for 25% of all of the processing capacity in America, what will that do to the price of what USDA will have to pay to secure that protein for hungry Americans? Almost all of the other amendments we've spoken about tonight were pre-submitted. I had an opportunity to have my staff look into them and get answers along that size and scope, which gave me some comfort in voting. The hour is now getting closer to midnight. I don't understand the impact on hungry Americans through this. I don't understand the budgetary cost to USDA. I think studying this via a GAO report is more sensitive, appropriate, and respectful of the process than making us vote at a late hour at something when we don't have any idea what this will actually do to hungry Americans. And with that, I would yield.
Gentleman yields. Now recognize Mr. McGovern for 3 minutes.
I mean, this is ridiculous. I mean, you you don't even know what your SNAP amendment will do in terms of affecting people who are food insecure or hungry in this country. You've had a year and a half to put this farm bill together, and nobody's thought about child labor. It's really simple, right? You either think child labor is okay or you don't. And saying, oh, well, let's just do a study, that's the oldest trick in a book.
Will the gentleman yield?
You guys do that? No, I will not.
Yeah.
You guys do that all the time. Every time there's an issue you want to dodge, let's do a GAO study, which means we'll never get to it. So here's the deal. If you agree that child labor is a bad thing, not only in big companies, in small companies too. I mean, child labor all of a sudden is not okay because it's a smaller operation. This is wrong. And so if you think child labor is okay, vote for this secondary amendment. If you think it is wrong, like we do, then vote for the Kazar amendment.
Will the gentleman yield with his 2 minutes remaining?
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize Mr. Kasar for 3 minutes. Mr. Case.
On the farm when I was a kid. I mean, I'm sorry you didn't get the same experience. Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Kasar, you're recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm available to answer whatever questions may come up here. First of all, we tried to narrowly tailor this amendment specifically to meatpacking plants. You know, lots of people work under the age of 18, but it's been illegal since 1938 to work in meatpacking plants for good reason. I appreciate Mr. Van Orden and others stating that we want to solve this problem and want to figure out how. Thankfully, the United States has been working on this for nearly 100 years. And so that plant in Wisconsin, which I appreciate you denouncing those practices and pushing for them to fix it up, it wasn't discovered, in fact, by PBS or NPR. It was actually the Department of Labor that received complaints, investigated those complaints as they have since the 1930s, and found them in purposeful violation. I also hear people who say, well, there are smaller facilities, maybe they have more trouble following child labor law. I think they should follow the law, but again, in an effort to narrow this to be something that Democrats and Republicans could come together and support, this only applies to the direct contracts that the federal government has for meat. These are enormous multi-million-dollar contracts valued at over $500 million a year. So these are big contracts with mega corporations, and as I said in my opening remarks, they have legal departments bigger than most law firms in our cities and towns. They know exactly what's going on, just like the Department of Labor knows how to identify, as they did, not just in Wisconsin, but in many other states, 13-year-olds and 14-year-olds who, instead of going to school, were being sent to do illegal child labor. So I urge a no on the secondary amendment. I fully believe and appreciate the attempt to try to do something right on this, but we already know that child labor is going on. We've already been trying to enforce it for nearly 100 years, and all I'm asking is that when we hand out multi-million-dollar contracts to companies worth billions of dollars, and we find they're breaking the law, that we say, please stop breaking the law. And if they pervasively and consistently continue to break the law, that there might be contract consequences against them. So this should be something we can all rally behind. It's very clear. It's just saying child labor and minimum wage laws have been on the books since the 1930s. If we're handing you hundreds of millions or billions of dollars, please follow them. And if we catch you breaking the law, then please fix it. That's all we're asking them to do. So I respectfully urge a no vote on striking my entire amendment and replacing it with a study, and instead ask us to just have the guts to tell these folks with a lot of power, guys, it's time to clean up your act. Thank you very much, and I yield back to the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank Mr. Kessis for highlighting this as a challenge, as a place where child labor exploitation should never be allowed to exist. And we should be unified in the fact that not only would we condemn it, we would hold those bad actors accountable to the full extent of the law. But I will also note that we only received this amendment, less than 30 minutes ago. The reality here is that there are a number of questions that I think have been correctly brought up by Representative from Wisconsin, Derek Van Orden. What does the impact mean? If we have thousands of potential packers out here who are doing the right thing, but we're going to put a law out there that is going to require them all to meet a USDA and a Department of Labor inspection, we're talking about weeks, months, years before USDA inspectors are able to get out to most of these facilities and do exactly what you're asking for. As a military officer, I would much rather look at a targeted environment where we can identify where most likely those bad actors are, which this study would exactly do, and provide us the ability to go after those who are being harmed most acutely first. The reality is, if we shut down thousands of packers who are all part of this system that feeds to where you want to get to, the big guys, we potentially are going to destroy the entire ability for us to feed this country in a very short order. With that, if we don't get it done in 5 years, these guys go out of business. We have producers who will lose the ability to pack. We will have packers who cannot provide to their up channel. And as a result, the cost of protein across this country will skyrocket. And I know that's not what you want to do. We want to be able to protect people. And we should all be on this same mission set. But we should do it with our eyes wide open and know fully what the battlescape looks like before we attempt to pass a law in the middle of the night on something that is going to have an expansive impact on the entire system on how we do supply chain for meat in this country. With that, I would yield the remainder of my time to Derek Van Orden.
Thank you, Mr. Nunn. Thank you very much, sir. As I said, we're both trying to get to the same spot. We are. Child labor is abhorrent. The issue is, I believe the second and third order effects that are completely unintended by this well-meaning piece of legislation, sir, are going to have a much greater detrimental effect. So when we are holding people accountable for someone else's breaking the law, which is essentially what they're doing, when you are presenting false identification and you're intentionally going around the E-Verify system or other methods that are in place in order to gain employment yourself, you're violating the law. And to hold the parent company, which in this case, this is not a very large company, accountable for somebody intentionally breaking the law, I think is going to have a horrible effect across the entire packing industry. So again, Mr. McGovern, you're wrong. You are wrong, and I don't appreciate it. If you're saying that I've been supporting myself since I was 16, pal. So here's the thing. We do not support child labor as Republicans, and I'm not going to listen to you say that we
Gentlemen,
do.
time has expired, and now I recognize Dr. Adams for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, we don't need to circumvent the problem here. I am the ranking member on workforce protections. And our job there is to oversee what goes on, not only with workers, but with the employers who hire people. Now, we're talking still about children. We didn't want to feed them. Now we don't want to protect them and keep them safe and perhaps keep them living, because these places are very dangerous. And yes, and let me just say that the GAO study can be requested by letter. We don't need an amendment to do that. This is just a way to circumvent the real problem. Now, are my colleagues on the other side of the aisle scared to vote on the Caesar Amendment? Do we just want to pretend to the public that you're doing something and we're not doing anything? This is a good amendment that Mr. Caesar has brought forward to us. Children are suffering, they're dying in these places. And we know that. We've got information already. We don't need to do a doggone study. So let's go ahead and stop copping out and do the right thing. It's very simple. If you don't support children being abused and these labor laws that they have that abusing children in these places, then you need to support Mr. Caesar's amendment. And this other thing that's out here is just a way, again, it's a smokescreen. It's a cop-out. You know, we're bigger than that. Yeah, we've been here till almost midnight, so let's do something good before we go home. Can I yield my time? What do I have left? Let me yield it to Mr. McGovern. Mr. Caesar, you got it.
Mr. Cassar is recognized.
Thank you, Congresswoman. You know, I would like to go look, maybe after this, at the transcripts of the Congress in 1938, because they might have been having this same debate. Will the cost of meat go up if kids can't work at the plant? Will the meatpacking industry collapse if we don't let kids work anymore at the meatpacking plant? And the Congress came together back then in a bipartisan vote to pass the Fair Labor Standards Act and said, you know what, this is the United States of America. We can stop these abuses. We can pay a minimum wage, and we can have kids in school or working safer jobs up until the age of 18 years old. And so I'm just asking for us to reinforce what those before us did in 1938 and do it, as Mr. Nunn said, actually in a targeted way at these very large companies that we have direct contracting power with.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Now recognize Mr. Mann for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield my time to Mr. Johnson.
Mr. Johnson is recognized.
I would note that the gentleman from Texas talked about how we've had 100 years to study this issue. That may be the case, but apparently he didn't have enough time to submit his amendment in a timely manner. And facts matter and details matter, and I think we all would acknowledge that we do better work when we have an opportunity to assess the impacts of the policy before us. 48 other amendments were submitted on time. We were able to do our work. This was not submitted on time. That doesn't mean that it is without merit, but it does mean that the gentleman from Massachusetts does not know what the impact that this would have on the school lunch program. He doesn't know that. The gentleman from Texas cannot tell us how many fewer school lunches would be able to be provided because whole swaths of the American industry wouldn't be able to contract for school lunches. We don't know that. It doesn't mean that those facts don't exist. It does mean that we have not had the ability to analyze them. When we vote, we should vote in an informed manner. And I would just close by noting that one of the reasons the gentleman from Massachusetts gave for not supporting some of the financing mechanisms proposed by the chairman in this bill is that he didn't fully understand the fiscal impact of them. And I would say that if he felt like he was right then, he should feel as though voting yes on the Van Orden Amendment is right now.
Will the gentleman yield? Oh.
Yeah, I yield remaining time to Mr. Desjardins.
Okay, I would just say I want to identify with Mr. Johnson. If this was a serious amendment, it would have been offered in the appropriate time. This is nothing more than a thinly veiled attempt at a motion to recommit in a markup. I can tell by the smirks from this side that you're disappointed that it's not working. We're going to have 2 votes here. So we could sit here and go round and round. But we can have the first vote. We can have the second vote. Let's see how it shakes out. I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize Mrs. Hayes for 3 minutes.
Thank you. I just want to say that we're not disappointed. This is actually the process. We have an open dialogue. I want to point out that several Republican amendments were submitted after the committee hearing began. I'm pulling the timestamps, but this is a markup. We're not doing this in the dead of night. We've been going nonstop since 11 a.m., and this is the point where we're at Title 12. This is the process. Once again, we are here for the Farm Bill markup. We are considering things one at a time. Mr. Kassar has introduced an amendment, and we're here to talk about it. I just want to note that there has already been a GAO study requested on this very thing, and also that his amendment includes a reinstatement of ineligibility, which says that if any company is determined to have made sufficient progress in implementing corrective measures, that they could be reinstated. So I'm not really sure what the issue is, because I have a problem with child labor, whether it's the 4 big meat packing plants or a small grocer. We have labor laws in place for a reason, and children should be protected. And I know that there are many people on this committee who care about this, because this has come up in our other committee on education and the workforce a couple weeks ago, where many people expressed that this being a main priority for them and something that they wanted for us to address when we had the acting secretary before us. So all this is saying is that if a company, a large company who is receiving multi-million-dollar contracts from the USDA, is found to have engaged in egregious practices and violated child labor laws, that they are no longer eligible for those government contracts.
Will the gentleman
That
yield for
seems-
just a second?
I'm not done, and I only got 1 minute. Y'all should have gave me 5. I would have gave you 2.
I yielded to you.
But the problem here is that we can't even agree that child labor is wrong. And that is part of the problem. So I will be voting no on the secondary amendment and supporting Mr. Kassar's amendment, because we don't need a study for us to agree that children working in these meatpacking industries in egregious working conditions, violating labor laws, is just wrong. And we have the ability to do something about that. And this is the place where we have that conversation. Address it as part of the Farm Bill, introduce amendments, debate and discuss those amendments, and take a vote. And with that, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Recognize Mr. Duarte for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're all concerned about child labor, and I think it's insincere to predict that, to insinuate that any of us don't. We hear child labor a lot in our dialogue and our debate right now, but what I can't find, and I've read through the amendment twice sitting here, is any mention of child labor specifically in this amendment. What I read is the Secretary of Labor has been issued against the entity or any subcontractor of the entity for violations of the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938, 29 U.S.C. 201 essence quest, or regulations issued pursuant to such act. This is not a child labor amendment. This amendment covers all types of labor standards and violations.
Will the gentleman yield? I can explain that very clearly.
That could be determined by a Secretary of Labor who hasn't been confirmed by the Senate. She's an acting secretary, as was just mentioned a few moments ago, because she has a horrendous record of discriminating against employers in California. So please, I will waive time for that explanation.
Yes, sir. The Fair Labor Standards Act really has 2 major components to it. The minimum wage and child labor. And I tried to make it clear throughout my remarks that this would enforce minimum wage and child labor.
So this is a minimum wage and child labor act. We're focusing greatly on child labor here.
Yes, sir. I
But-
tried to lay that out in my introduction. Of course,
Yeah.
the child labor violations have made the news quite a bit, but those are the two main sections. The Fair Labor Standards Act does talk about other industries as well, which provides some of its length, but the amendment is specific to meatpacking.
Well, and that explains again why a last-minute amendment on a complex and important issue like this needs to be researched. We need to get industry input. We need to be able to look at the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 ourselves and see if our interpretations agree with your interpretations. This is simply not legitimate to throw at us at the last minute and then claim we either support your amendment that's vaguely drafted, late to come, complex, to be interpreted by a labor secretary that's never been confirmed, and then tell us we're in favor of child labor if we don't support you on it. I'll be voting against this.
Would the gentleman from
I wave back
California
to the
yield for
chairman.
just a second? Would the gentleman from California yield?
Yes, to Austin Scott. Yes, sir.
33 seconds.
Mr. Caesar, the timestamp on the amendment is 327.
Okay, sir.
So you've held this amendment since 327. That's when it was drafted. And the amendment, for the record, is not just about the large companies. It says, or any subcontractor of the entity. So any subcontractor, no matter how small that is, of the entity, you're going to be held liable for.
It's the law.
This is of a regulation about, no ma'am, I'm not yielding to you, probably won't ever yield.
I didn't
to
ask you to yield.
Okay, well, you were interrupting me then.
No, I
Or
wasn't.
any
That wasn't me.
subcontractor of the entity for a violation of the Fair Labor Standards Act are regulations. It's ridiculous.
Time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman, I'd like unanimous consent to make a motion to enter something into the record.
Without objection.
I'd like to enter into the record the November 2018 Working Children GAO report. So the GAO has studied this, over 100-page report. So I'd like to enter it into the record to maybe save ourselves the time of asking them to do it again. Thank you.
Well, let me, first of all, everybody take a deep breath. We have done so well today, and the meltdown on this last one is, in my mind, in my opinion, for what it's worth as chairman, is unacceptable. Let's work our way through this. We do have a secondary amendment. Mr. Kaser, I think anyone that's abusing child labor is evil, and it's, especially if they're doing it in any type of systemic way. And I just want to say up front, although the vote will be on the secondary amendment, and quite frankly, GAO, making sure the information, this is a very complex and very deep subject to get at the very end, and sort of a last-minute thing with a lot of complexity. I mean, there's a couple of us that serve on Education and Labor, or Education and Workforce Committee, and quite frankly, I can see jurisdictional issues with that committee, let alone, well, that committee in particular. And so what I will share with you, Mr. Kassar, is I would be happy going forward to work with you on this issue, and we're able to do that not at 20 till 12 with a short window here. Now, we're going to continue to hear from everybody, so I'm not cutting anybody off, but I just would like everybody to take a deep breath so we finish here with decorum and quite frankly, the grace that I think we've done here in these past. Yeah, I know you didn't ask for time. And you always try to get done before I could gavel you down, too. So I'm going to recognize Mr. Jackson next for 3 minutes.
I'd like to yield my time to Dr. Adams.
Dr. Adams is
I
recognized
thank the
again.
gentleman for yielding. I won't take all of that time, but I just wanted to add a couple of things. You know, again, delay. This is a very important issue, as my colleagues have said. I, along with Mr. Scott, requested, I sit on Ed and the Workforce, and requested some time ago, actually this past June, in a joint letter with Representative Scott, for a hearing on this issue in that committee. And so here again, another act of delay. And we need to stop delaying. We're talking about children. We're talking about their lives. And we're talking about their safety. And so when you look at this situation, usually children that are forced to work are hungry Americans. So it's all about making sure that we care for our children. And if we say we do, if we say that using children in workplaces that's unsafe is wrong, then we need to stand up and show that we believe that and support this amendment to do so. So I'm going to, Mr. Jackson, I'm going to yield back.
Thank you. I yield to Mr. McGovern.
Yeah, I mean, people say this is complicated. It isn't that complicated. I don't quite get what my Republican friends are talking about. To hear the argument that somehow this would jeopardize our food supply, let me remind you, meatpacking firm profits jumped 300% during the pandemic. So bull that we have to accept child labor to keep meat prices down. And as we speak, I mean, Republican state legislatures all over the country are weakening child labor laws. It is sick and it is twisted, and it's twisted that Republicans on this committee are covering for that by pretending everyone is on the same page on child labor. We're clearly not. I yield back.
Thank you very much. I find it very interesting. I just want to make this a point for the record. A Florence, Wisconsin-based company was also fined in 2023 $1.4 million after a sawmill death of a young child, age of 16, that had been caught in. The firm that you referred to was fined $1.5 million, and their practice spanned over 8 states. It was a very sophisticated operation for 102 people. So, in following with the spirit of Mr. Kassar, and focusing on the largest employers purely that would use this sort of behavior. In the city of Chicago, we have a migrant issue. Now they are trafficking from the state of Texas children that are minors that are also at risk. So in the interest of child safety, we move with alacrity. So I thank the gentleman Kassar from Texas, and I hope we prioritize this because it has to deal with child safety. And let us err on the abundance of caution and move on protecting children, as we all appreciate. And I thank you very much. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize, these are the folks I have in the queue. Mr. Langworthy, Mr. Costa, Mr. Lucas, Ms. Brown, Ms. Crockett, Mr. Carbajal. Now recognize Mr. Langworthy for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I join all of my colleagues in just expressing outrage and how evil exploiting child labor is. But I would like to yield as much time as he'll consume to Mr. Van Orten.
Thank you, Mr. Langworthy. I agree with my dear friend from the great state of Illinois, Mr. John Jackson, my very good friend. And like I said, we're all trying to get to the same place. We're just trying to get there in the most efficient manner so we can help the most amount of people. And I will remind everybody on this committee, I voted against my chair and the rest of my Republican colleagues today on the en bloc for all of these amendments because this committee in 2018 during the Farm Bill made an error when they were dealing with cannabinoids and hemp. And now they want to reverse that through a well-intended amendment by Ms. Miller, and it's going to destroy an industry. So we have to collectively have a memory longer than a gnat because we just talked about that today. We just did that today. So let's not do this again. Let's make sure we have this very methodically done because this is an incredibly important industry. And no one on this committee, nobody believes that child labor is a good thing to do. And I would remind my dear colleague from Massachusetts, if he truly cared about child labor, he would acknowledge the fact that 70% of the world's cobalt comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo. 40% of the cobalt mines are called artesian mines, and those are manned by children, African children, that are digging cobalt with their hands. The reason this is so important and why you should be paying attention, sir, is that 4.3% of all batteries for electric cars are comprised of cobalt. That's being mined by African children by their hands. So if, in fact, you do, sir, care about child labor, then I would see that you would vociferously be opposing this Green New Deal stuff because that's the real application of this. That's the truth. Secretary Buttigieg admitted that in a T&I committee hearing, as did his deputy. So if you have a problem with those facts, you need to speak to the Secretary of Transportation under the Biden administration, sir.
And
with
check
that,
my
I
record
yield
on
back.
human rights, please.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields, Mr. Langworthy yields back. Now I recognize Mr. Costa for 3 minutes.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I don't know that the committee's listening to you, but cooler heads prevailing at this late hour. But I want to make something clear. I have always opposed child labor. It's a very simple concept to me. And I think the gentleman from Texas has been talking with members about this last week. He raised the issue with me. I said, I've had 4 significant packing operations in my congressional district over the years, mid-sized, large operations, both beef and poultry. And they comply with the law. I think that there have been violations around the country. And sometimes these plants find themselves in violation. But child labor is a pretty easy concept to deal with. You either, and most of these firms' operations, they have human resources departments and they have personnel and they protect themselves against it. It's a bad mark to have a fine of violating child labor law, period. And it's a very competitive industry. And we're not going to be running out of poultry or beef because a company chooses to either be unwilling to follow the law, or they are negligent in some fashion, or they're hiring people that are negligent. And man, if they're hiring people that are large operations that are negligent, they better, clean up their operation. It's real simple. So we've got a competitive industry in poultry and beef, and they all acknowledge when the child labor is illegal, period. And we've had reports on this by the Department of Labor that go back. So I don't think a report's necessary, and I think that, frankly, this will incentivize good actors to want to ensure that they follow the law. It's really, I think, very clear. So it seems to me that we vote on the Second Amendment as you choose, and then we have the First Amendment before us. And let's finish the committee's business and vote on the final bill. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize Mr. Lucas for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I certainly share your comments from a little bit ago. It's hard to believe that it's been 10 years ago since we spent 2.5 years crafting the third-generation Farm Bill. And a number of you on the back row were a part of that process, where we had to fight off elements within each caucus, elements within leadership, in order to come up with a comprehensive Farm Bill. And I think it was a pretty amazing product. And the Ag Committee at that point, as it had traditionally been, was so dramatically different than any other committee. Now, think of me as the old uncle. Think of me as the old guy on the wall, whatever you want to think of me as. As the evening has progressed, we have started to sound a little bit like government oversight or judiciary or some of the other committees where everybody likes to fight. That's not the House Agriculture Committee. That's not the House Agriculture Committee. We face challenges just doing our work when we are all working together. Now, on this language, I have to assume that everybody is well-intentioned in the primary amendment and the secondary amendment. I understand that, and I'm going to vote in a certain fashion on both. But if this has been against the law since 1938, maybe we need to bring in the Secretary of Labor and the Secretary of Ag and the Director of OSHA and give them a thorough discussion about how they're enforcing existing law. You know, there's folks back home who say you shouldn't pass more laws till you enforce the laws you have. There's some validity to that, my friends. So, again, I have the greatest respect for all of you. I've seen this body do some of the most amazing work in the last decade. If we can't craft in this committee and on the floor a comprehensive bill, then I don't know how we ever make it all the way through the process. And one last thought. I know there's some concern here about restricting the authority of various secretaries in the executive branch. But remember, my friends, the next administration may not be this administration. And the people you are leaving more empowered may be people in the future who will use that power in a fashion contrary to what you define as the best interest. I've been around long enough. I'm suspicious of all executive branches. But the only way we fulfill our responsibilities is pulling together. Let's vote and get this over with. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman yields back. Now recognize Congresswoman Brown for 3 minutes.
I'd like to yield time to the representative from Connecticut, Ms. Hayes.
Thank you. I just want to say, once again, on this committee, that policy disagreements don't amount to fighting. This is the venue by which we do that, where we introduce opposing viewpoints. I don't know how that devolves into the fact that we are not doing our jobs. That is what the democratic process looks like. As a teacher, we all the time, kids, opposing viewpoints, a point and a counterpoint. You present your best argument, you make your case. That doesn't mean that the process has devolved. It means the process is actually working. People have input, they have viewpoints, they want to weigh in. This is where that happens. And it is late, but we've gone title by title, and this is Title 12 in the miscellaneous title. I'm sure Mr. Kassar would have loved to have introduced this amendment in Title I, in Title II, in Title III, but this is where it belongs, and this is the process where we're at. So I just remind people that a policy disagreement doesn't mean that we are not listening to the chair or following the process or in some way misbehaving. We are doing what we were sent here to do, and it is to discuss these issues. That's what we're supposed to do. I yield back to Ms. Brown.
I yield the balance of my time.
Minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I don't think we have a policy disagreement here. Everyone who has spoken on this amendment and the second amendment has stated very clearly, we are all against child labor exploitation. That is not one of the things that we're talking about. We're against child labor laws. Or for child labor laws. We're against the children being used in inappropriate ways in these settings. The problem that we're seeing here is one, and Representative Adams, you said this, you said delay, delay, delay. The only thing that has been delayed is the submission of this amendment. And it has been clearly pointed out, because yes, we all have receipts, that this was prepared well in advance, but was by design deliberately withheld in order to drop a poison pill at the last minute, where we don't have the time to go through it. And I actually have a point of inquiry on whether or not this is actually germane. Not only does this amendment not mention once minor or child or children, so we can't even call this a child labor bill or amendment, but it actually refers multiple times throughout this amendment that this is through the directive of the Secretary of Labor, not the Secretary of the USDA. So if you see on page 2 in section C, corrective measures, it says on an annual basis, the Secretary of Labor shall. It goes on multiple times throughout this amendment. For the first page, consultation, section B, the Secretary of Labor shall. This is an amendment that is designed to go to a committee of completely different jurisdiction. This is not germane to this committee as it currently stands, and I wish that the gentleman from Texas would have actually offered this amendment in a way that we could have worked to get this to a place where we could collectively, in a unified fashion, all be behind this. But by circumventing this entire section, this entire process, in an effort at midnight to drop this, that really just, I think, undercuts the credibility of this. So, you know, I don't believe this is germane to the bill, and the underlying text, I really question, because the only tie that I see here, quite frankly, is that the Secretary of Labor has to issue a report to the Secretary of the USDA.
Will you yield for 10 seconds just for the parliamentary question?
Sure.
So this bill is H.R. 2822, which the parliamentarians referred only to agriculture and not to education and labor because...
I understand that, and I'm going to actually reclaim my time because I mentioned that when we got this about, 15 minutes ago, and unfortunately, the parliamentarians are asleep now. And I would have appealed the jurisdiction that it was referred to because, as I have stated, this is a job for the Secretary of Labor, not the Secretary of the USDA, as is clearly defined. And it is possible to appeal the referral from the parliamentarians. But again, you withheld this. You chose not to submit this.
Time has expired. And just for clarification, the bill is germane based on the assigned
not germane.
jurisdiction to the Agriculture Committee.
It's not germane.
I recognize Ms. Crockett for 3 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. It is weird to me. I don't know how America is taking this. They're probably asleep as well. But the party of law and order is basically saying law and order is absolutely something that we should pay attention to unless we can save money by using children, or unless we can save money by using undocumented workers, unless we can save money by making sure that we don't pay people the minimum wage. Listen, these are laws that are on the books, right? So the question is, are we going to continue to say that because we said we don't believe in exploiting children, then that is going to save children's lives? It's not going to do a daggone thing. It's why Americans are frustrated with us now in the most unproductive Congress in modern day history, because we got a lot of words, but we weren't sent here to talk. We were sent here to do something. Our actions are not comporting with our words. And so the counter amendment, it absolutely wants to look at a study. There's a study. The study is over 100 pages long. And this is a very narrow amendment strictly for the purpose of actually trying to move something good into this bill that's going nowhere. I honestly don't think that this bill will make it to the floor. And if it makes it to the floor, then God bless, because that means that the math is getting better on y'all's side. But even if it makes it to the floor, I just don't see how it passes. So at least we could give something that makes it look like we care about children, because we don't do anything on guns, but we will give you a lot of lip service and say thoughts and prayers. We're not doing anything when it comes to feeding children in this country, but we will say, you know what, I really appreciated SNAP when I was growing up. And right now, we won't do anything about child labor when we literally have, I didn't need a daggone study. But I don't know why it's okay that we say, well, we've got to look at whether or not the cost of food is going to go up if somebody is breaking the law. What happened to law and order? This is another deterrent for those that are going to be the bad guys. Because for some people, them having to pay a fine of $1 million, it just ain't enough. This is an additional deterrent. And here's the deal. Other people can go buy the child labor meat if they want to. We, as the United States, the ones who came up with the law that is literally almost 100 years old, we should not send our taxpayer dollars to people that are breaking the laws that we put on the books. That's all it's doing. And I yield.
The gentleman yield back? Yes, okay. Anyone else? Yes? All right, I'm sorry, I just didn't hear you. Mr. Carbajal is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I haven't said much tonight. I've been just sitting back and really being somewhat disgusted today. I think Mr. Cassara is basically saying, let's make sure the law is being enforced. Let's make sure the United States government is not being complicit in associating ourselves with those breaking the law. We're concerned about impacts, financial impacts of products over the well-being of children. I hear that maybe we ought to do a study. Maybe fraudulent documents were used when these children applied to these companies. And sure, that does happen. But the Department of Labor found credible evidence that said otherwise. If businesses follow the law, they are absolved because they were following the law in accepting and having to accept certain fraudulent documents. But in the case we're talking about, clearly there was evidence above and beyond. And all Mr. Kassar is saying is, let's not be complicit as the United States government in procuring products on taxpayer money from companies that are breaking the law. And we don't need a study. We don't need to wait. We just need to make sure the law is being followed. It's so simple. To do a study is a ruse. We're either for law and order and protecting children, or it's all a bunch of bullshit. I yield to Mr. Jackson.
Thank you so much, Congressman. And if there's any questions about adolescents and whether or not we can save a lot of time on trying to figure out if we need to do a study on adolescents, I can give you a few pointers for some of the gentlemen. If you see them in some gym shoes that have lights on it, they're probably a teenager. If they have some puberty on their face, they're probably a teenager. If they're laughing and giggling, they're probably a teenager. So let's not study what teenage adolescent behavior is. Let's clean up this industry where children are being exploited, children are being transported across state line. There's an influx of undocumented children that are now in our streets. And where are they going to go? They're going to go to these places where they're most vulnerable. Let's clean it up. Thank you.
Very good. That is all I had in the queue. Does any other members want to speak on the secondary amendment?
Let's vote.
Let me add just my comments before we do that. Quite frankly, I share the concerns that Mr. Kassar has raised in his amendment. I would like some time to be able to vet, and what I'd like to do in the immediate future is to require, I don't think we'll have to subpoena them, I think they'll come willingly, but to get before this full committee, Secretary of Labor and the Secretary of Agriculture specifically on this issue, so that I know there's a lot of emotional, anecdotal identification of these abuses. You know, if we're going to legislate, and we should do that in a serious way, let's find out what their observations are and their incidents. So you have my couple promises I want to make tonight. Number one, I've already talked with my staff about taking that action and getting that set up as soon as possible, and I already promised Mr. Kassar to be able to work with him. So that said, okay, secondary amendments, here we go. Seeing none, the motion is on Mr. Van Orden's secondary degree amendment. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. No. Independent of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like a recorded vote.
Recorded vote has been requested.
And a point of information, Chairman, right before we take that vote, does this mean if this motion indeed passed, does that mean that the underlying amendment is essentially wiped out because this amendment strikes the underlying one, or is there a separate vote on the other text?
Vote on the amendment as amended.
That is correct. If the secondary amendment passes, it passes as a substitute for the original
But
amendment.
there's two.
Right. So
There is two votes procedurally.
So you vote on the secondary amendment,
You vote on the secondary amendment,
and then the amendment as amended.
and then on the amendment as amended.
right, understood. So,
Yeah.
but my question, Chairman, just it sounds like it isn't just me, freshman here, confused. Since the Van Orden amendment strikes the entirety of the Kassar amendment, if it amends it, but the amendment strikes and replaces my amendment in its entirety, which,
Exact same.
in which case,
It is two votes with the exact same language.
got it.
Yeah.
But sorry, if I could just try to finish it so that maybe I can understand it as well. Essentially, if the Van Orden amendment passes, then we would take a second vote, which would be essentially on the Van Orden amendment again, therefore nullifying and wiping out the enforcement provisions and replacing it with a study both times.
That's correct interpretation, according to proper procedure.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. So,
I recorded vote.
and the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Lucas.
Yes.
Mr. Lucas votes yes. Mr. Austin Scott. Mr. Austin Scott votes yes. Mr. Crawford. Mr. Crawford votes yes. Mr. Desjardins. Mr. Desjardins votes yes. Mr. LaMalfa. Mr. LaMalfa votes aye. Mr. Rouser. Mr. Rouser votes aye. Mr. Kelly. Mr. Kelly votes aye. Mr. Bacon. Mr. Bacon votes aye. Mr. Bost. Mr. Bost votes aye. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson votes aye. Mr. Baird. Mr. Baird votes aye. Mr. Mann. Mr. Mann votes aye. Mr. Feenstra. Mr. Feenstra votes aye. Mrs. Miller. Mrs. Miller votes aye. Mr. Moore. Mr. Moore votes aye. Mrs. Kamick. Mrs. Kamick votes aye. Mr. Finstad. Mr. Finstad votes aye. Mr. Rose. Mr. Rose votes aye. Mr. Jackson of Texas. Mr. Jackson of Texas votes aye. Mr. Molinaro. Mr. Molinaro votes aye. Ms. De La Cruz. Ms. De La Cruz votes aye. Mr. Langworthy. Mr. Langworthy votes aye. Mr. Duarte. Mr. Duarte votes aye. Mr. Nunn. Mr. Nunn votes aye. Mr. Alford. Mr. Alford votes aye. Mr. Van Orden. Mr. Van Orden votes aye. Ms. Chavez de Reamer. Ms. Chavez de Reamer votes aye. Mr. Miller of Ohio. Mr. Miller votes aye. Mr. David Scott.
No.
Mr. David Scott votes no. Mr. Costa. Mr. Costa votes no. Mr. McGovern. Mr. McGovern votes no. Ms. Adams. Ms. Adams votes no. Ms. Spanberger. Ms. Spanberger votes no. Mrs. Hayes. Mrs. Hayes votes no. Ms. Brown. Ms. Brown votes no. Ms. Davids. Ms. Davids votes no. Ms. Slotkin.
No.
Ms. Slotkin votes no. Ms. Caraveo.
No.
Ms. Caraveo votes no. Ms. Salinas.
No.
Ms. Salinas votes no. Ms. Glusenkamp-Perez.
Nope.
Ms. Glusenkamp-Perez votes no. Mr. Davis.
No.
Mr. Davis votes no. Ms. Takuda. Ms. Takuda votes no. Ms. Budzinski. Ms. Budzinski votes no. Mr. Sorensen.
No.
Mr. Sorensen votes no. Mr. Vasquez.
No.
Mr. Vasquez votes no. Ms. Crockett.
No.
Ms. Crockett votes no. Mr. Jackson.
No.
Mr. Jackson votes no. Mr. Kazar.
No.
Mr. Kazar votes no. Ms. Pingree. Ms. Pingree votes no. Mr. Carbajal.
No.
Mr. Carbajal votes no. Ms. Craig. Ms. Craig votes no. Mr. Soto.
No.
Mr. Soto votes no. Mr. Bishop.
No.
Mr. Bishop votes no. Mr. Chairman. Chairman votes aye. Mr. Chairman, on that vote, the yeas were 29, the nays are 25.
Any further debate on the Casar Amendment as amended by the Van Orden second-degree amendment?
Can I ask a
Ms. Hayes.
clarifying question? Oh, microphone is tired, sleepy. I just have a question on Mr. Casar's, just on a process question.
Yep.
I thought that if you offer when you offer an amendment, the amendment is debated, and then the question is asked, are there any amendments to the amendment? And in this process, Mr. Casar offered an amendment, and the very next person to speak was Mr. Van Orden. And once that secondary amendment was offered, then we had to deal with the second amendment, the secondary amendment. But we never had the opportunity to deal with the First Amendment in the first place, because the very next person to speak was offering the secondary amendment.
The amendment to the amendment can be offered at any time,
Okay.
so it was done properly.
Chairman, I have a question.
So, go ahead, please.
So the initial amendment is not discussed at all? I mean, I hear you saying the second one.
When the secondary amendment is offered, that's what the debate is all about.
So it was offered just to
now-
kill the
yeah.
real amendment.
It's now the amendment, so-
That's what really happened here.
So that's a
You
clarification.
didn't want to deal with that amendment.
Is there any
Put
further
that
debate
second-
on the
I mean,
Cassar
come on,
amendment?
let's be
as
real
amended
about
by
it.
Van Orden's second degree
But
amendment?
that was by design.
Yeah.
You're telling me order.
Go ahead, Ms. Pingree.
Thank you, Ms. Pingree.
Cassar's recognized.
Thank you, Ms. Pingree, and I.
Yeah. Let the gentleman be heard, please.
Thank you, Ms. Pingree, and I appreciate the chairman offering a hearing with the appropriate secretaries. I hope that that will be fruitful. But to me, this vote, which we did our best to craft in good faith to be a narrow vote on enforcing child labor law and the minimum wage, to me, it's emblematic of why I and so many other Democrats will not be able to support a farm bill that we all came here wanting to support. Because this farm bill, as presented by the Republican majority, protects the powerful and protects the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable in so many situations. Let's look at this one as one example. The big meat packers have been fighting this bill from the start. We filed it months ago. There's a companion in the Senate. We've been narrowing it down. The reason that there's amendments and amendments to amendments is that the meat packers have known they have consolidated across the industry. They've gotten bigger and bigger. And with that size, they've thrown their political weight around. They've driven up prices for consumers by reducing free market competition. They've broken the law at their plants. The law has been broken at their plants. And folks say, well, where are we going to get our meat? Because there's so few options. What if we enforce child labor law against them? Who will we get our meat from? Because they've gotten so big. And they've driven down revenue for farmers and ranchers. Whether you're in a Democratic district or a Republican district, I know when you go talk with small ranchers, folks have seen their revenue drop as the big meat packers have consolidated their economic and political power. So in this farm bill, working families are taking a hit, a cut or a reduction to the nutrition programs that feed them. Farm workers are taking a hit, but the protections are for the meat packers. Instead of us enforcing child labor laws or the minimum wage, they get a multi-million-dollar contract. And the vote that just happened on party line was, we'll study it. So the meat packers get a study with their multi-million-dollar contracts. Workers will continue to be exploited. We see that in other sections of this bill. Liability shields for chemical companies that otherwise would be sued for having cancerous pesticides. So the chemical companies get a liability shield, the meat packers get a study, working families, they get a cut to the SNAP benefits that they otherwise could receive. And in my view, that's why this isn't just a partisan farm bill. It's a farm bill that ultimately serves the interests of those folks that have lobbyists at the expense of the everyday constituents. And with that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The motion is on the Cassar amendment as amended. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment as amended by Van Orden's second-degree amendment is adopted. I now recognize the ranking member for the submit for the record, I believe.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I ask to enter into the record letters of opposition from 900 organizations, actually 899 organizations, opposing this farm bill, including very diverse types of organizations, including the AFL-CIO, the Illinois Corn and Soy Alliance, for Retired Americans, the Alliance of Nurses for a Healthy Environment, American Association for Justice, the Catholic Relief Service, and many other religious organizations, healthcare organizations, food banks, food pantries, state farmers unions, and environmental groups, and more. And I present this to you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlemen, submitted for the Farm Bill record. We now open up the bill for any remaining amendments that have not been offered. Does any members have an amendment? I believe Mr. Nunn seeks recognition.
What are we doing?
We have no paper on Nunn.
Mr. Chairman, I have Amendment 34 at the desk.
Amendment number?
34.
Amendment 34 from Mr. Nunn. The clerk will distribute the amendment, and the clerk will record the title. 34. Probably have it. I got it. No, I don't have it. Yeah, I do.
Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I'll go ahead and get started.
Go ahead. The gentleman from Iowa is recognized for 3 minutes to describe his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In a time of unprecedented input costs, it is critical that America's farmers, ranchers have the support they need to continue doing what they do best, raising livestock and providing Americans with quality food. Yet we continue to see a push for laboratory-grown meat and a potential effort to replace traditional protein with a so-called meat-like sludge. In speaking with the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, they've highlighted that if and when this Frankenstein protein-like laboratory-grown meat product hits America's grocery store shelves, the U.S. beef industry is not afraid to compete on a level playing field. But it is inappropriate to use taxpayer dollars to help big companies scale up this product, particularly when companies involved in lab-grown meat production already enjoy high levels of funding from private big money investors. Specifically, it's irresponsible and inappropriate to use taxpayer dollars to aid in the growth of a industry that has a history of mishandling funds. Specifically, Mr. Chair, in the last 10 years, the National Science Foundation has issued roughly $5 million in research grants, and USDA National Institute of Food and Agriculture has issued approximately $12 million in research grants for laboratory-grown protein products. Meanwhile, it is estimated that over the last 10 years, approximately $3 billion in private capital flowed to these cell-cultured protein companies. Several of these companies have thus been sued for a breach of contract for not paying their bills. The company Good Meats Incorporated failed to pay over $100 million owed to the meat machines to grow the cultured products, and yet they're using taxpayer dollars to fund these companies that cannot properly manage the funds they already have and provide false business models to investors. It would be irresponsible for us to do that with our taxpayer dollars. The use of these funds for the purpose would be jarringly out of step with the purpose of this Farm Bill. Finite Farm Bill dollars intended to help our country's farmers and ranchers who work hard on the land every day to put food on our nation's table not only would provide a handout to well-financed fake food engineering companies, it would be a direct threat to traditional farming. With that, I would encourage my colleagues to work with me and support every cattle rancher and farmer in our home states to be successful. I appreciate the chairman's work at this, and I would withdraw in the ability to work on this within conference committee.
Mr. Nunn, you'll back. I look forward to working with you. Other members seek to speak in this amendments. Mrs. Miller.
Thank you. I want to voice my support for this amendment that would ensure taxpayer money is not used to research lab-grown meat. Agriculture research should focus on providing farmers and ranchers with the tools and information they need to improve their operations. It should not focus on subsidizing lab-grown meat, an industry that has already received over $3 billion in venture capital funding. Americans don't want to eat lab-grown meat, and we certainly do not want our taxpayer dollars funding their research. We support real beef, real poultry, and real pork. I thank Mr. Nunn for introducing this amendment, and I yield back.
Generally yields back. Now recognize Mr. Alford for.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief. Thank you, Mr. Nunn, for bringing this all-important amendment to us today. Actually, we have a bipartisan amendment, Mr. Jackson, who I don't see over there, but we dropped this bill almost 2 months ago, the Fair Label Act, on the House floor, and it basically says if it's grown in a petri dish, if it's grown in a lab, you cannot call it meat. You have to have accurate labeling. We need to get ahead of this. This is, maybe you've seen some videos on Instagram or Facebook. They are making things look like steak, filet mignons. That is not meat. We cannot call it meat. And so that's why I'm for the Fair Label Act. And Mr. Nunn, I'm for this amendment as well. We have to protect our producers in our districts and in America to uphold the standards, the terminology for what is the sustenance of America, and that is protein from animals. Thank you, sir, and I yield back.
Anyone else seek to speak on this amendment? I appreciate Mr. Nunn bringing this forward. It's an incredibly important issue and one I look forward to working with him on. That said, the bill is now closed. I now recognize the gentleman from Oklahoma for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the bill H.R. 8467 as amended be reported favorably to the House with a recommendation that it do pass.
This is a debatable motion. Does any member wish to discuss the motion? Seeing none, the question is on the motion offered by the gentleman from Oklahoma to favorably report H.R. 8467 as amended. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed by saying no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the bill H.R. 8467 as amended is ordered to be reported favorably to the House.
Mr. Chairman, I call for a roll call vote.
Roll call vote, a recorded vote has been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Lucas?
Yes.
Mr. Lucas votes yes. Mr. Austin Scott? Yes. Mr. Austin Scott votes yes. Mr. Crawford? Yes. Mr. Crawford votes yes. Mr. Desjardins? Yes. Mr. Desjardins votes yes. Mr. LaMalfa? Mr. LaMalfa votes aye. Mr. Rouser? Mr. Rouser votes aye. Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Mr. Kelly votes aye. Mr. Bacon?
Yes.
Mr. Bacon votes aye. Mr. Bost?
Yes.
Mr. Bost votes yes. Mr. Johnson? Mr. Johnson votes yes. Mr. Baird?
Yes.
Mr. Baird votes yes. Mr. Mann?
Yes.
Mr. Mann votes yes. Mr. Feenstra? Mr. Feenstra votes yes. Mrs. Miller? Mrs. Miller votes yes. Mr. Moore? Mr. Moore votes yes. Mrs. Kamick?
Yes.
Mrs. Kamick votes yes. Mr. Finstad?
Yes.
Mr. Finstad votes yes. Mr. Rose?
Yes.
Mr. Rose votes yes. Mr. Jackson of Texas?
Yes.
Mr. Jackson of Texas votes yes. Mr. Molinaro? Mr. Molinaro votes yes. Ms. De La Cruz? Ms. De La Cruz votes yes. Mr. Langworthy? Mr. Langworthy votes yes. Mr. Duarte?
Yes.
Mr. Duarte votes yes. Mr. Nunn?
Yes.
Mr. Nunn votes yes. Mr. Alford?
Big fat yes.
Mr. Alford votes yes. Mr. Van Orden?
Yes.
Mr. Van Orden votes yes. Ms. Chavez DeRemer? Ms. Chavez DeRemer votes yes. Mr. Miller of Ohio? Mr. Miller of Ohio votes yes. Mr. David Scott?
No.
Mr. David Scott votes no. Mr. Costa?
Costa, no.
Mr. Costa votes no. Mr. McGovern?
No.
Mr. McGovern votes no. Ms. Adams? No. Ms. Adams votes no. Ms. Spanberger?
No.
Ms. Spanberger votes no. Mrs. Hayes?
No.
Mrs. Hayes votes no. Ms. Brown? Ms. Brown votes no. Ms. Davids?
No.
Ms. Davids votes no. Ms. Slotkin?
No.
Ms. Slotkin votes no. Ms. Caraveo?
Yes.
Ms. Caraveo votes yes. Ms. Salinas? No. Ms. Salinas votes no. Ms. Glusenkamp-Perez?
No.
Ms. Glusenkamp-Perez votes no. Mr. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Davis votes aye. Ms. Takuda? Ms. Takuda, excuse me, votes no. Ms. Budzinski? No. Ms. Budzinski votes no. Mr. Sorensen?
Yes.
Mr. Sorensen votes yes. Mr. Vasquez? Mr. Vasquez votes no. Ms. Crockett?
No.
Ms. Crockett votes no. Mr. Jackson? Mr. Jackson votes no. Mr. Kassar? Mr. Kassar votes no. Ms. Pingree? No. Ms. Pingree votes no. Mr. Carbajal? No. Mr. Carbajal votes no. Ms. Craig? No. Ms. Craig votes no. Mr. Soto? Mr. Soto votes no. Mr. Bishop? Mr. Bishop votes yes. Mr. Chairman?
Oh, yeah. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change his or her vote?
Well, I have to say
If
this.
not, the clerk,
I have to say this.
No,
they haven't reported yet, the numbers. If not, the clerk will report.
You know I have to say this.
Oh, yeah, I got
Oh,
you.
okay.
They are counting the votes, right?
Yeah, they're counting.
Are they?
All right.
I thought all that hand.
That was bipartisan.
Huh?
See that one coming.
What?
Mr. Sorensen voted for the bill.
Sorensen?
Yeah.
What about Davis?
I did. That's the only one I noticed. That's the only one I noticed.